Hello, welcome to the Vineyard Church podcast. For more information, visit us at vkcwest.com.
All right, so today is Easter. You guys know that. But on Easter, we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We celebrate his life, his death. And the point is that the things you read of Jesus doing in the book, he's still doing because he's alive. But now he's doing it through his people, through his church. He's still touching lives. He's still caring for the poor. He's still doing miracles. He's still bringing new life to the lost. But now he's doing it through his people. And so billions of people have believed in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And there's 5 reasons to believe in the resurrection of Jesus, because there's some space in between us in this event. The empty tomb, it's still empty. The body of Jesus is not there. There was the appearances of Jesus after his resurrection, where he appeared to single people or his disciples, and then at one time he appeared to over 500 people after he rose from the grave. And then also, too, the transformed lives of his disciples. At his arrest, Jesus was arrested, and then his disciples fled, and they were fearful. And a couple of them followed closely, but for the most part, they all fled, and they were cowering in a room. And yet, somehow, on that Sunday morning, they received courage. And all of them, except for one, gave their lives for this message that we're talking about. They laid down their lives. It was so true to them. And then also the impact of history that the resurrection of Jesus has had. And then lastly, the experience of billions of people. But many people believe these truths, and I would say to a certain extent, if you're here, you believe these truths, or at least you are open to them. And there's people here that you're like, hey, they believe it. I'm cool. I'm good if these things, are true. And then others, we really say, I really believe this. I really, really believe this. And yet the interesting thing is that a lot of times there's a disconnect between our belief of these things and then actually integrating the resurrection into our lives. Because it's not presented in a way that it's just kind of like a fact that we know. It's not presented in a way that just kind of like, well, that's nice. But it's actually presented in a way that we're to integrate the resurrection and actually the person of Jesus into our very lives. This is what Jesus said. He said, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So the problem with it being rare that people integrate the resurrection of Jesus and the person of Jesus with their lives is that that's the whole point. The whole point is that the resurrection would not just be something that is just one thing amongst other things, but it would be the thing. That a person would actually integrate their entire life with this person of Jesus, to the point where he says here that his very sustenance, his very life, like a vine to branches, that we would rely upon him in such a way. Integration of life with the risen Christ is described as a living hope by Peter, who was the leader of his disciples. And we're going to look into his life today. This is what Peter wrote later on in his life. He says, 1 Peter 1:3-4, he says, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth, now listen, into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you. So hope here is not like wishful thinking, right? If somebody says, well, I sure hope I can do it. Like if you ask somebody, maybe like playing a sport or at a job, you say, well, do you think you can accomplish that? Well, I hope so. I hope. That's kind of how we view hope. Biblical hope is not that way. Biblical hope is you can take it to the bank. This is an expectation of how things are going to be. And more importantly, the language here in the Greek is written in such a way that the living is supposed to be done while the hoping is happening. So Christians have been known as hopers throughout time. That we actually are living our hope before we even actually receive the fullness of that which we're hoping for. We're living it now. Yet somehow, many of us get lost in between believing in the resurrection, believing in Jesus, and then actually having a living hope where our lives are actually integrated with him. And the difference between belief and living hope is astounding, because lots of people believe what we're talking about today, but it is somewhat rare that we would integrate our lives with this. And let me put it this way. Michelle, my wife, and I, we have 3 boys, now young men. And when they were young, we had told them about s'mores. Anybody like s'mores? Right? The graham cracker, the marshmallow, and the chocolate. We had told them about those, but they had never had them until one glorious day on a beach in Central California. And we told them about it. Hold on, take it back. Come on, Luke. I said don't. Put it back. Put it back. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Man. All right. There has to be a build-up here. I mean, that's what we're doing. So, I practiced this for a week. So we told them about it, and they could even tell people what a s'more was. They believed that s'mores were such a thing. They had even possibly seen other people have s'mores, but they had never had s'mores until this glorious day on the beach in Central California. There we go. So it's interesting. Make sure the people online see that too. And so it's interesting, if you look at their faces, the difference between kind of just believing in and living, right? So the oldest one, he's kind of like, oh, this is good. And then the middle son is like, you're right, this is really good. And then the youngest, to form, says, Dad, I'm watching you, don't come close, I'm eating this whole thing. Isn't that the look? It's exactly that. So, but the difference between belief and actually living something is astounding, just like that. And that's what we want to dive into today. We want to dive into the difference that happens between belief and living hope. And I've lived it. I had belief early on, and then went, and it's even a journey that you go back to. Sometimes you go back to just belief versus this living hope. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the life of Peter, and we're going to see how this is illustrated in him. Even the leader of the church, the Christian church. Peter was somebody that he didn't really perform at church very well. He always said the wrong thing. He offended all the faithful people. And yet he was the leader of the disciples of Jesus. So hopefully that brings hope for some of us today. If you're not a church person. If this is maybe the first time at church. I remember the first time I was at church. I was 15 years old. And yet Peter was one that had integrated and was living this hope. And so let's read John chapter 20, verse 1. We're going to read the account of the resurrection and look for Peter in the midst of this. So it says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. So Jesus was crucified and buried in the tomb on a Friday, and it was pushing up on the Sabbath. And so things were done in a quick way, and Mary would have been mourning like the family. The family would mourn when they would lose a loved one for about a week. For about 7 days, they would stay in their home. And Mary would have been that close that she would have been mourning in that way, but she needed to complete that which had been started a few days before. And so there's all kinds of questions. How would she roll the stone back? How she could do this? We don't know, but she felt like she had a duty to go to the tomb. And it says the stone had been removed from the entrance. And so there's a picture here of what this stone would have been. And it would have been a 2,000-pound stone that would have, they used gravity to seal this thing. And so there would be a trench, and this stone, a disc stone, would be rolled down into this covering over the entrance. And obviously very difficult to get that back out. And yet as Mary arrived, the stone was removed. It wasn't there anymore. How could this have happened? Matthew's gospel tells us that there was a violent earthquake and an angel rolled back the stone and then sat on it. Isn't that a cool detail? Just roll it back and say, man, haven't done that before. Just sat there, the tomb is open, Jesus is not there. Mark's gospel, which was given to Mark by Peter. That's why the Gospel of Mark is this fast-paced and then, because Peter is this hard-charging guy, and he dictated this to Mark. It tells us that the angel told Mary this, go tell Peter and the other disciples about what has happened, that Jesus has risen. Now, wait a minute. Why did they single out Peter? Well, we're going to find out in just a minute. So verse 3, it says, so Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. This is pretty standard in some of the writings of this time. They would kind of point things out like who won the race, and even though it has nothing to do with what's happening. And John would have been a few years younger than Peter, but I think that there's maybe another reason why Peter was farther behind than just his athletic ability. And so verse 5, it says, speaking of John, he bent over and looked at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. So although John arrived first, he was a good Jew, and Jews did not want to defile themselves around the dead. If they defiled themselves around the dead, they would be unclean for a certain period of time. And so it's possible that as John came to the entrance of the tomb, that he kind of paused and didn't want to defile himself. And in this tomb, there would have been kind of a place where you would step down in a center section, and then on the right and the left, there would have been shelves that were carved out of stone for bodies. So more than one person would have been buried in this tomb. And we know it was Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, and so he was a rich man, and so it was a very nice tomb. And so shelves on the right and the left. And if you think that maybe the head of Jesus was put near the entrance, as he entered in, he could maybe just see the linens, maybe just the feet and part of where the legs were before. It says, then Simon Peter came along him and went straight into the tomb, and he saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. And the cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. So characteristically, Peter just charges right in. He's not concerned about any of the rules or the traditions or anything. He's just like, man, I heard Jesus is not here. I want to see this thing. And the description of the linens and the cloth is interesting because you don't really catch it in the language necessarily. But what it's trying to say is saying that the linen, so everything over his body, and there would have been spices there still. The other Gospels tell us the spices are there still too, is that the linens were still formed as they were wrapped around the body, but it was like they were collapsed in. So it was that the body of Jesus just passed through them. If somebody had stolen the body, as people have said for a long time, whether it was the disciples or whether it was the Jews or the Romans, I mean, why would they go to such trouble? They would have just taken the linens and everything with the body. And then too, it says that there was a cloth there. That's like a handkerchief about that size, and it would have been over the face. And that one too is what it's saying is that a little bit bigger than a handkerchief, but it was wrapped still, like the way that it would have been around the head of Jesus. And so they came in, and it was as if Jesus had just passed through these, and it would make sense. We see later on in some of his appearing to disciples that he would actually just appear in a room, closed doors and everything, and all of a sudden he's like, hey guys. And he's there. And so somehow in his new body, Jesus was able to do these things. In verse 8, it says, finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. So it says he saw and believed, and the belief was from the evidence of the empty tomb, and then also the cloths that were lying there. But then it says they still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Look, Jesus said over and over again to his disciples that he would have to die and then he would rise again. He told them very plainly. But if you read the Gospels, it's clear that Jesus tells them stuff and they don't get it over and over again. Just over and over again. In other words, they've already decided in their minds of how this is going to go. And yet when God tells them plainly, this is how it's going to go, they're like, I still believe this. I mean, it sounds familiar. I mean, we do that all the time. I mean, God speaks to us all the time of how things are and how he would have things to be. And yet we go, yeah, I don't know. I'm still good with this way. And that's how the disciples were. And John is saying that it was actually through the scriptures that Jesus would speak of these things. And so it was plainly before all of them. And if he had understood, he would have done that. Now we know that Peter and John walked away, but we know that from Luke's gospel that Peter walked away in a place of wonderment. He was wondering to himself what happened. Luke 24:12 says, Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, now listen, wondering to himself what had happened. I mean, really clearly, the disciples didn't expect for this to happen. I mean, that's one of the great evidences of this. And also, too, if you think that the disciples, manufactured this whole thing, you're giving them way too much credit. If you read their lives, they just were not that strategic. And besides that, they were from all these different groups and parties that sometimes didn't get along. I mean, it's clear that unless something really cohesive brought them together, they couldn't even get things done together. And so Peter, he needs to move past his belief to living hope. He looks at it and he says, yeah, Jesus isn't here and it looks miraculous. It looks like the fingerprints of God are here. But he needs to move to something bigger, and here's why. Peter's mentioned he's mentioned almost 200 times in the New Testament. Besides the person of Jesus, in the gospel stories, he is the central character. That is the place that he holds here. He probably was the best friend of Jesus. Now, John was described as the one that Jesus loved, but you see Peter and Jesus over and over again hanging out. Because what do you do with your really, really good friends? You get into it, don't you? I mean, if you're a good friend, at some point you're going to have friction. And Peter and Jesus had incredible friction at times. Peter was a fisherman, and he was uneducated. He would have learned the scriptures from a young age at about 5 or older and memorized many parts of the scriptures. But as far as other learning, he was uneducated. He was married, and his wife went on missions trips with him after Christ raised from the grave from this time. We read in Corinthians and other places. He had a Galilean accent, and so he would have been kind of the person showing up to the party, and which is the Galilean accent was offensive to the Judean people. They would have been kind of like, who brought this guy? He was always saying the wrong thing, and he said it in an accent that was abrasive to everybody else. His name is always listed first in the list of the disciples. He didn't seem to fit in at church most of the time. We talked about that. And when Jesus met him, he gave him a new name. Now, the book of Revelation says that if you have trusted in Jesus Christ and your name is written in the book of life, that you'll be given a new name. And it's a name that represents who you are. And I think that Jesus was so excited to give Peter his new name that he just gave it to him first time he met him. Because his normal name was Simon, which was a very common name. And yet the name Peter was not a real name at that point. It didn't become normal until about the 2nd or 3rd century that Peter became a name that people named their children and they're named after. And Peter means rock. And he was pointing prophetically that he would build what he's going to do as Peter as one rock, right? Because Peter writes later on that we all are being brought together as living stones to build something. So Peter understood he wasn't the only rock, but he was just one of many. So Peter's the first person to confess Jesus as the Christ or the Messiah. And yet all this that Peter had going for him, he's defined or threatened to be defined by his worst day. I mean, you may not want to think about it today, but think about your worst day. Like where you just really blew it. Hopefully it's something that you just said, but maybe it's something that you did. And do you really want to be defined by that worst day? Well, for Peter, he is being threatened with being defined by that. Because even though he had all of that going for him, Jesus is dead, and right before he died, Peter stood publicly in front of his peers and in front of the most powerful religious people, and he denied that he even knew Jesus. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And even worse, Jesus looked at him right after he did it the 3rd time. And so unless Jesus rose from the grave, Peter would be never forgiven. He would sit down into his failure. He would just absolutely sit down into it. By the way, I found out recently that I've made a lot of progress in wisdom, and yet, like the OSHA things, like this many days since accidents? You guys know those things at job sites? I have that in my life, and it's this many days since doing something really stupid. And I was going for years, even decades even. And then one day, we rented a U-Haul truck to move some stuff, the sheds, as we started to move these sheds and stuff. We need to put some stuff in there. And I dropped my wallet in the parking lot at the U-Haul place. And I was so excited when I found out I had dropped it because I had an air tag on it for the first time. I said, hot dog. And I looked and I told my wife, Michelle, I said, hop in the car, we're going. Somebody's got my wallet and they're moving. And so we chased this wallet all over like some of the worst parts of Kansas City, Kansas. And some of you are saying, what are you thinking, right? It's like, it's okay, I'm going to say let's pray and you can leave. You're like, I'm not listening to this guy anymore. But long story short, I even go up to the home, right? And it says, there's this little yippy dog when I walk up, and there's a U-Haul truck there. I'm like, pay dirt. This guy was there, has my wallet. And it says, beware of dog. And here, scoot over, Eddie. There's some people behind you there. It says, beware of dog. I'm like, no problem. I got this dog. Long story short, I won't tell you the whole thing. Yes, I could have died. Yes, all sorts of stuff. But long story short, as I'm talking to the people, hey, I think my wallet's here. A big Rottweiler comes out. And then as they tell me that there's no wallet there, then a pit bull comes out. And they were inside. So somehow I felt like I was thrown to the wolves. But I did find my wallet. It was empty inside of the truck next to a Corona bottle. And so all that to say is you can tell this guy went on a wild ride. But as I got back in the car and we're driving away, I told my wife, I said, that was really stupid. And she goes, I've been telling you that for an hour. And I said, well, you should have told me clearer. And she goes, well, how else could I tell you? I'm just like, I don't know. Just so all I have to say is, I'm not prone to not doing stupid things. And but we're all still alive. God's gracious to me. But it could have gone really bad. And so we're all prone, like Peter, to make decisions like this, where all of a sudden we miss it. And yet, Peter, he didn't know if he'd be forgiven because he put everything into Jesus. And yet now all of a sudden the tomb is empty. And what stands out about Peter is that he fails miserably and he fails publicly, but he recovers really well. Something else that we know about him? When he fails, he doesn't try to cover it up. When he sins big, when he makes something stupid, he just goes ahead and confesses it. Like he's just like, oh man, I'm here. And, there seems to be the picture that when it comes to God and it comes to, Jesus, we're like, man, I just got to have it all together and everybody has to think I have it all together. No, it appears that God loves the heart that's humble. He loves the imperfect, broken heart that with all of the will and all of the everything within it just says, I believe and I want to go after God, and yet I do still make mistakes and I'm still going after him. That's the kind of heart that Peter had. He honestly admits his sins and failures, and he doesn't harden his heart. And so one of the appearances of Jesus is John chapter 21. And because, like I said, Peter, he denied Jesus 3 times publicly. But then Jesus, what he does, and this is what takes us from belief to living hope. That if you're in a place of belief today where you say, I believe the things that we're talking about, Cody, but I don't know that my life is integrated with this person of Jesus. This is the thing that happens. And if it doesn't happen, we never get to living hope. Because Jesus is not just one person amongst others. He is God, and he has a way of doing things, and this must happen. He's not looking for a business partner. He's not looking for someone that's far off. He's looking for you to be close enough for him to love and for you to love him. Read what he does with Peter. And now the scene was Peter was fishing with his buddies, and Jesus calls him to the shore, and Peter jumps out of the boat and swims, and he's on the shore, and it says, and they ate a fish breakfast, and it says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. And again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. And the third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. See, Peter had said he loved Jesus more than others previously. He said, look, even though all these other ones deny you, I will never deny you. And so by the third time, Peter starts to get offended, but then he realizes what Jesus is doing. Publicly, he's restoring him. Publicly, he's giving him a chance 3 times to say, I love you, Jesus. And some people play on the words here, like Jesus uses like kind of a God kind of love, like an unconditional love. He says agapao. And then Peter says phileo, which is like a brotherly love. And I wouldn't read too much into it. People would use them interchangeably. But I think Peter, what we see is that Jesus uses that like God kind of unconditional love. And Peter doesn't use that word. He uses more of a humble love. And Peter has been transformed and changed here, where he's like, look, you know I love you. Look, you know I love you. And yet he's much humbler than before. And so Jesus brings Jesus close enough that he can love him. And so what we know is this, is that we know that the love of Jesus helps us live in the hope of Jesus. You see, we have to have a love encounter with the person of Jesus, where we know that he has grasped our heart and that his love penetrates our heart. And what does that mean? Cody, how do I do that? Like I've heard that before. Jesus loves me. Well, listen, it means that you bring like your worst moments like Peter and you say, here, Lord. Now, what's hard is for some of us, our worst moments are things that have been done to us. And you're like, well, I don't let anybody in there. Well, that's where the Lord wants to care for you and love you. That's where he wants to go in. And what's interesting is about Peter, he told everybody, this is God, this is the Messiah. He did what Soren Kierkegaard, Danish philosopher and theologian, this is what he said it means to be a Christian. To be a Christian, you must stand in the crowd and point to a man and say, he is God. That's what it means to be a Christian. And why, though? It's because he can transform your life and he can transform my life into this place that we have this living hope. We're living in such a way, even though it's not that way yet. And I heard a story recently about Jacob Deshazer, and we see that Jesus forgives and restores a changed life. So I'm just going to share these notes so I don't miss any details. But Jacob Deshazer, he was raised in a devout Christian home. That may be you today, but you've walked away from the Lord just as Jacob did. This is the early 1900s. And as he grew older, he no longer believed in God. He put his faith in patriotism and humanitarianism, which led him into the U.S. Army. At 28, Jacob's world was rocked with most of the world, where the United States in 1941 was attacked at Pearl Harbor, and December 7th, right? And in that grew anger and a desire for revenge in Jacob. He was in the U.S. Army, and so he volunteered for a secret mission to bomb the Japanese city of Nagoya. And Jacob had such a sense of satisfaction at bombing factories that he wasn't finished yet. When the factories were burning, he began to fire his gun at civilians. And Jacob's plane ran out of fuel and was taken captive by the Japanese. And he was in captivity. He was beaten daily. His hatred grew for the Japanese people so much that it just embroiled him. Yet in the midst of this, he began to recall Bible verses that his parents had taught him as a child. And he pleaded for a Bible from his captors and was given one 2 years later. And in the Bible, he read of a more excellent way in 1 Corinthians 12:31, the way of Jesus Christ. And his heart began to be changed to the way of Jesus, the way of love. And Jacob began sharing the gospel with the guards and praying for them, even the ones that beat him daily. And after 40 months of captivity, Jacob and the other soldiers were rescued. After his release, Jacob pursued theology at Asbury Seminary in Wilmore, Kentucky. And after graduating, Jacob chose to return to Japan and share the gospel with the very people that actually, Kevin, there's people behind you there. Thank you. Sorry. With the people he once hated. The Japanese, I know, you guys are really happy. I know you're really dialed in back there. Okay, now you can see me. Maybe they're okay. So yeah. They probably don't care. But anyways, after graduating, Jacob returned to Japan. And so the Japanese people were shocked that the former prisoner of war came to share the gospel with them, that they had done all these things to him. So thousands of Japanese gave their life to Christ for him as he returned to this place. And now listen to this. This is really important. One of those people that came and gave their lives to Christ was Mitsuo Fuchida, who was the Japanese commander who led the attack on Pearl Harbor. And after receiving Christ, like Jacob, Mitsuo also became an evangelist. And they stood side by side and led thousands of people to know Jesus Christ. Jacob, during his time, planted 24 churches in Japan, including one in the city that he had bombed. And why do I share that to you? Because there's a belief that all of this is just kind of nice and it feels good and it's just a moment and it doesn't really affect real life. But tell me a greater story of how healing happens in the earth than this. Tell me a greater story how people in different places that are born different and look different and all those things, that they're made one than the gospel of Jesus Christ. There's no better way than the resurrection of Jesus Christ to heal things. And maybe your stories are not as big a riff as this today. But know that God can heal your heart. God can heal my heart. But we must move beyond just belief and move to this place of living hope. And it comes from giving our real hearts and our lives to Jesus, close enough that he would love us. Whatever you hold tight and you lock up in you deep inside, whether something you've done or something somebody has done to you, bring it to Jesus. Bring your real self to him. That's where life is and healing, like we read here.
Thanks for listening this week. If you are looking for ways to serve, give, or get connected, go to bkcwest.com.